Please note that this review has spoilers for the opening of the movie. I've tried to keep things vague for the remainder of the review if you've never seen the film and would like to watch it. Halloween 3: Season of the Witch, the only Halloween film in which Michael Myers doesn't appear as a character. Wait, there are no witches either. Well, kind of. What is going on here? Halloween 3 was written and directed by Tommy Lee Wallace, who was one of the editors on the original Halloween, as well as John Carpenter's The Fog. He even played Michael Myers in that famous closet scene. The film opened in 1982 to a generally negative reception. After the conclusion of Halloween 2, the intention was to create a sort of anthology series in which a new Halloween-based film would come out every few years. Evidenced by Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers in 1988, this idea obviously didn't pan out. Halloween 3 has since gone on to become somewhat of a cult film, and in the past few years, especially after Shout Factory's 4K release of the Halloween franchise, I feel as if this movie has picked up even more steam. It's by no means a masterpiece, but it's a fun horror movie with a lot of atmosphere and mood. It's one of the few films in the franchise that I rewatch every year. That great vibe of the movie is set straight away during the opening credits sequence. It blasts out of the gate with a creepy synth score composed by franchise mainstay Alan Howarth. Perhaps I'm a bit biased as a musician, but I really think Howarth's score is absolutely integral to this film. There is no classic Halloween theme here, but the music perfectly suits the movie. It almost feels cerebral at times. The traditional opening credits pumpkin sequence is replaced by a digital pumpkin on a CRT screen. It lets you know what you're in for straight away, almost suggesting a science fiction angle to the film. We open with a man named Harry being pursued by a group of suited men, almost reminiscent of like the agents from The Matrix. All the while, he's holding onto this mask, which will become a focal point of the movie later on. He eventually makes his way to the hospital, where he exposition dumps about some spooky nonsense tied to these Halloween masks. At the hospital, he's looked after by our main character and everyman, Dr. Daniel Chalice, played by Tom Atkins, who gives a really good performance here. Daniel is a flawed guy. We learn he has a drinking problem and issues with his family. Later on, one of the suited men from earlier breaks in, murders Harry, and walks outside and lights himself on fire. It's a pretty insane opening to a movie. Creates a lot of questions right away, and that's a lot of the flow of the film. This movie has like a conspiratorial angle to it. Daniel eventually hooks up, literally, with Harry's daughter, Ellie, played by Stacey Nelkin, and the two head to Santa Mira to investigate the Silver Shamrock Group, the company responsible for making the masks. I've always felt Daniel and Ellie's relationship seems a bit forced, but it's ultimately not a big deal. I probably first watched this movie in 2003 on AMC. They used to marathon all the Halloween films every October. I remember watching this late at night, and I kept asking myself, where is Michael Myers? Is that guy who lit himself on fire Michael? What the fuck is going on? It's not like I could just pause the movie and check. I don't even think I had internet at that time, so I couldn't even go look it up. I just kept watching the movie and it clicked after a while. I ended up really enjoying it. Without getting too deep into the plot, the Silver Shamrock Company is led by Conal Cochran, played by Irish actor Daniel O'Herlihy. Sorry for that pronunciation. His character is definitely pure evil, but he kind of plays the character in a pretty exaggerated way, almost like a mustache-twirling villain. He often catches a lot of flack from fans, but I enjoy his campy performance. These now iconic masks, the pumpkin, skull, and witch, have a microchip embedded in them that, while triggered by a TV commercial, straight up fucking kills the wearer. I'm not going to play the song here, but it's going to be stuck in your head for days after you hear it. And now we have this clear message about the dangers of consumerism and advertising that is prominent throughout the film. It also deals with a few other things, such as the origins of the holiday, but they're not really executed quite as well, I feel. Most of the movie is our two main characters following clues and detecting, trying to figure out just what the hell is going on. Going back to that conspiratorial angle, I always feel like it gives the film a sense of dread, something I find lacking a lot of times for more modern offerings. The characters are obviously in way over their heads, they're just trying to do what they feel is their moral duty, but they're uncovering something they definitely shouldn't be uncovering. Nobody can help them, they're completely on their own. I love this feeling in movies. It almost plays out like a nightmare. You open your mouth to scream, but no sound comes out. That's not to say that director Wallace is exactly trying to be a Carpenter clone here. He definitely brings his own flair to the film, but it does feel decidedly like a John Carpenter movie. You got the weird science fiction angle, tone, and music all contributing. Obviously, this was a failed experiment, but I always appreciated that this doesn't play out anything like a typical slasher movie. They clearly tried to do something completely different. It's more like a suspenseful thriller, almost a bit of a mystery movie. And I should quickly talk about the effects work. Like a lot of these early 80s films, if you're a fan of practical effects, they're awesome and a ton of fun to watch. As I said in the beginning, I watch this movie every year and I almost always forget how violent this is. There's immolation, decapitations, fucking kids dying, and some pretty gnarly body horror, which is where I think the sci-fi horror angle comes into play. Of course, they're not always the most believable, but that's the difference between practical effects and CGI to me. Bad CGI is bad CGI forever and looks fake on first viewing. Suspect practical effects might not be the most believable, but they get their intended point across. Some of the effects work in here definitely gets a visceral reaction out of me. If you struggle with body horror and insects, there are some scenes that are hard to watch. I should note that I don't own a copy of this movie, so I watched it on Peacock. Honestly, the picture was pretty good, but I have seen the 4K release of this and it looks fantastic. Those Scream Factory editions are great to own for fans of the series. So, this movie has a bit of 80s cheese to it, and it isn't really considered one of the top Halloween films, but I think if you've never seen it, it's definitely worth checking out. I always wonder what the franchise would be like today if they kept this anthology format. We certainly wouldn't have a bunch of terrible sequels, but then again, we'd probably just have a ton of forgettable 80s horror movies. Not to say this is a family-friendly movie by any means, but I always like to start the Halloween season with these lighter, fun movies. I like to save the heavy hitters for later in the month. After all, dopamine is a very precious resource. So, thanks to everyone for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.